Itzalverdi opened the tavern door. He could no longer tell whether the noise from the street was greater than what came from within. The jingling of chimes over the clamor drew the attention of one of the waitresses, who came forward to greet him. "Welcome," she looked up at him with a smile. "Will it be the usual, mister?" He nodded slightly in response, and the waitress left to prepare his table. Inwardly, he was amused. This very same serving girl was giving him the most vehement glares when he first came to the city. It was to be expected, he supposed. His first few weeks in Irantal consisted of him frequenting the Merchant Inn's tavern on a daily basis, but, due to his limited coin, he had loitered in the empty space for hours with nothing but a cup of water. Now, with his stipend from the Adventurer Guild, he was provided ample funding to room here, as well as order a day's worth of full meals from the kitchen. The empty state of the inn, too, had drastically changed. It had transformed from the barely frequented establishment of early spring to one filled with merchants and their hired men. The inn was near full occupancy and its tavern was bustling, employees rushing about to keep up with their patrons. A constant murmur drifting through the light haze, the press of bodies, and the sound of a bard performing from an unseen corner made it difficult to believe that the warm and cozy atmosphere was cold and sterile not long ago. The serving girl returned with a hesitant look on her face, and Itzal frowned at her uncharacteristic expression. "What is it?" he asked. "Your table, someone's there," she answered. "They say they know you, but I've never seen 'em before." Itzal's gaze reflexively turned in the direction of his usual seat, but he couldn't see across the crowded floor. His mind worked through the possibilities as he waded through the patrons, and a sudden thrill of anticipation ran up his spine when he saw the two figures seated there. He nodded once more to the serving girl to send her on her way before taking a polished, wooden chair. The man seated across from him was a familiar sight from times past, sporting a head of closely cropped black hair and a roughly shaven jaw. The plain-faced brunette beside him was entirely unfamiliar, but the light and conservative style of her garb suggested that she, too, was from the south. "Going up in the world, I see," the man noted as he performed a gesture with his right hand. Following the man's gaze to his chest, Itzal's fingers touched the gold tag clasped around his neck. He had stayed on with the Adventurer Guild to learn what the Sorceress Kingdom was up to there, and the stipend provided to a gold rank was roughly equivalent to the wage of a master craftsman. Compared to eking out an uncertain living as a mercenary, it certainly was a step up. "This is it." Saul cut off his reply when the woman leaned close to the man and whispered something into his ear. "She says that your adventurer tag has an enchantment on it," the man answered Itzal's unspoken question. "You're being tracked." "What?" Itzal said sharply. He cringed at the sound of his own voice and looked around to see if he had drawn any attention to himself. Turning a pleading gaze back to the man, he struggled to find words to defend himself. "Relax," the man said with an easygoing air. "We're not accusing you of anything. This practice is not unknown to us. We, too, use it to track our own people and, should misfortune befall them, recover their remains." "We?" Itzal frowned, then shifted his attention to the third member at the table. "Who is this woman?" "For the duration of this assignment," the man replied, "she is also your superior. Considering the state of things here, I thought it prudent to call in someone from one of the other branches." Itzal nodded. Through his long history working with the man, he knew him to be from the Windflower Scripture, which operated passively for the most part, overseeing and traversing the information networks throughout the regions surrounding the theocracy. If it was another branch with functions related to the gathering of intelligence, then this woman should be from the Clearwater Scripture. He knew next to nothing about it beyond scarce mentions in passing, however. "Call in, wait, how long have you been here for?" Itzal asked. "I room at this inn, and you've only appeared now?" "I actually departed the theocracy a few months ago," he replied. "Just inside the border, however, I was involved in an unfortunate incident, and was captured by the authorities." "No. What did they do to you? Are you all right?" "Fortunately, the noble involved spoke in my defense, so I was let off with a fine for property damage." He laughed in a helpless sort of way. "My purse became quite light after I was released. The other reason our new friend is here is to detect if anyone has been subjected to compromising spells or abilities, starting with myself." Itzal nodded slowly at his account. If another agent was required from the south, The entire process would probably take that long, given deliberations and travel time. Is it safe to say all this in a busy tavern? He asked. It is not a concern, the man replied. Our friend here is a cleric and has warded our table with an enchantment that renders us beneath notice. If we do not call any attention to ourselves on purpose, no one will pay any attention to us. I see, then what's our mission here? You've been here long enough to see what's going on. What will the theocracy do? The serving girl appeared at Itzal's side, placing the hearty meal he usually ordered before him. She walked away without a word, even while the man across from him spoke. Our mission is as it always has been, to collect information and send anything useful on its way. Our friend will render magical assistance if the situation calls for it, and see to her own duties. All of the agents here will assist her if she requires it. As for our superiors, they will do what they deem necessary, using what information they have. It's hard to believe that it's business as usual seeing everything that has happened here. Yet that is what it is, and its importance is even more so seeing everything that has happened here. It is clearly not Reestize anymore, things are moving too fast, and there is too much that is not understood. The people at home can barely make heads or tails of what is going on, so what we report is of great interest and urgency. You understand this, yes? Yes, of course. Itzal straightened in his chair. What would you have us do? A few of the others have already come by, the man said, and they appear to be well positioned. By their tellings, you have fallen in with these new adventurers, which is good. Come, enjoy your meal before it grows cold, and regale us with your tales. Itzal felt uncomfortable being the only one partaking at the table, but he did as he was instructed. He started from the beginning, about the state of the Erantal when he arrived, its gradual recovery and the suspicions which he held about human collaboration in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. He related Guildmaster Einsack's call to his members and the divisive result. They stopped him on several points to question or have him elaborate on his observations. This training is not too dissimilar to what is practiced in other nations with similar means, the man said, save for the continual restructuring of the entire facility by this dark elf druid. The degree of challenge and authenticity is greater than most can afford as well since they appear to be able to use resurrection magic on a whim. Tell me, have you ever fought against humans in this training? The question made Itzal realize that, in all of his sessions, he had never done so. Not directly, at least. As a rogue, he did participate in laying down challenging sequences of traps for other parties to face, but, beyond that, all he had fought were various types of demi-humans and summons that were conjured by unseen casters. A thought came to him. They do not pit humans against humans, but if you consider it in reverse, they are pitting inhuman creatures against humans. Ogres, trolls, goblins, hobgoblins, lizardmen, the controllers of the summons, while we train against them, they are training against us. Everything we do is being observed by the proctors assessing our performance as well. Who knows who else may be watching? The two scripture members exchanged looks. The Sorcerer's Kingdom has forces walking about openly in the streets that far outstrip the adventurers that we have seen, the man told him, so we consider demi-humans being used directly against humans in such a manner unlikely. The observation of human capabilities is a valid point, however. You say their claim is that the Adventurer Guild is supposed to be an expeditionary force for the Sorcerer's Kingdom, their purpose, to explore the unknown. All we've heard is this endless training, however. Is there any inkling of these expeditions being enacted soon? Itzal straightened in his seat, taking a swallow from the chilled ale set beside his meal. Considering the timing, it seemed a leading question. Well, no matter, it was something he would normally be reporting, anyways. A training expedition has been organized, he told them. In a forest to the southwest, south of the newly reorganized Vulcanheim County. Oh? The man raised an eyebrow. Have they shared any information about it with their members? I've been selected as one of the participants, Itzal replied, but in-depth information beyond our loose roles is absent. We're to go in blind, establish a camp and perform functions that are, on the surface, in line with the mandate of the new Adventurer Guild. Our general orders appear to mostly revolve around mapping, surveying, and collecting samples of interest to be sent for analysis back in the city. Since this exercise is being conducted within the borders of the Sorcerer's Kingdom, it has the feel of casual reconnaissance, with no chance of encountering what might be considered foreign elements. So you have not directly noticed anything that points to underlying motives or thinking, though you suspect that there is more to these expeditions? I believe it to be highly likely, Itzal nodded. As you say, the strength of the Sorceress Kingdom's undead armies is more than adequate for any overt military actions, and the mandate of their new adventurer guild serves a complementary role. I would hardly be surprised if their expeditions were simply the precursor to invasion, used to identify key territory, the information gained through their unassuming facade employed to plot a nation's demise. I see, the man said. Well, what actions they ultimately take on these so-called expeditions will make clear the true purpose of this organization. Again, it is good that you have positioned yourself for the future. I know that it is not exactly the way of things you are used to, so it is to be especially lauded. Itzal felt a rare warmth creeping out from within. Such appreciation was mostly unheard of in his career as an informant, and recognition from his superiors that he had gone out his way to prove himself useful was extremely gratifying. He focused on his meal for a few moments in order to keep the openly pleased expression off of his face. Speaking of which, the man continued. Have you been able to make any inroads at all in the usual ways? I am not expecting much, I assure you. They seem to have replaced the impoverished with the savage. You have the right of it, Itzal nodded. Things are practiced much differently outside of the slums. The usual means are far less available, and those that are available are far more expensive. I would wager those of us working within trade guilds and merchant companies will be far more effective in the current circumstances. And you would win that wager, the man smirked. We have several dozen agents in the nearby region from our usual movements, but I have sent word for more. Soon we will have quite a number from all places that send their trade through here. The Sorceress Kingdom has opened their borders to all merchants, and even wayfarers who simply seek to learn more of the new nation. They have even claimed that they do not mind spies, though I am not entirely sure if this was made in jest. Is it safe to concentrate our agents here? Itzal frowned. As expansive as our operations are, losing so many at once will still take time to recover fully. I cannot see how the Sorceress Kingdom could detect ours specifically, the man shrugged. They would be a few amongst many. You have most likely seen them yourself, agents from the Empire, Carnassus and beyond. I have even seen what I am pretty sure are dwarf spies. Their nation is outwardly friendly to this one, but suspicions regarding such a monstrous friend are sure to linger. Itzal grunted in silent agreement as the man spoke and he continued eating. Reastais was the edge of nowhere when it came to the world. No one treated the nation of unsophisticated and primitive people with any real interest aside from the merchants and criminals who could exploit their backward state. The appearance of the Sorceress Kingdom was a shock to many who received the news in the surrounding regions, as any such nation led by an undead sovereign would naturally be perceived as a dire threat, and an enemy to all. Opening their borders to trade and travel was an invitation of sorts to any that desired information. Given the outward appearance that they had chosen to take, the Sorcerer King was attempting to lull everyone into complacency. Then I'm to continue with the Adventurer Guild, Itzal said after washing down the last of his supper. Is there anything that you're aware of that I should keep an eye out for? You would know better than I, the man said. No one else has entered the new organization. Establishing yourself as a ready ear and shoulder should provide us with a wealth of information, given the loose-lipped nature of adventurers. Working your way further up their ranks and, well, this is all common sense. Magic items, the woman spoke to him for the first time. Itzal looked askance to the man, who returned an unknowing look and a shrug. A portion of my own assignment, her hazel eyes pulled his own back towards her, it is of the utmost importance. You said that in addition to a government stipend for the adventurers, they also have an exchange of sorts for equipment and other items. If you notice any items of rare potency, those that should not be available through local artifice or regional commerce, attempt to obtain them through legitimate means. That sounds like something I'll be doing anyways, Itzal replied, so it shouldn't be a problem as long as it's a justifiable purchase. If I pick up something I can't use, that's sure to raise eyebrows. The intensity of the woman's gaze lessened, and she let out a small sigh. Of course, she said. You will forgive me for my insistence, it was just too crucial a matter to idly mention. Even if you are unable to personally possess them, a report of their existence would still help. Is it possible to share why this is so important? Itzal asked. A part of it, she answered. I have been explicitly instructed to monitor the city for powerful items, and examine them if I have the opportunity to. I cannot do so illegally, as it would cut my time short here. So you are a promising source given the relationship this new adventurer guild shares with the Sorcerer's Kingdom. What happens if you find what you're looking for? I cannot say, exactly, but word will be sent back immediately if I do. It is for my superiors to decide. Itzal's breath stopped when he considered who scripture members ultimately reported to. A weighty task had been shared with him, one that was considered a priority to even a cardinal of the slain theocracy. Is there anything else I should know? Not regarding this matter, but I received a message from home just before you arrived. It is not a mission for us, per se, but everyone should be made aware and act in accordance. The man shifted in his seat to face her. Apparently, it was the first he had heard of this as well. As you should already know, she said, the theocracy has adopted a neutral stance regarding the Sorcerer's Kingdom upon learning the result of the Battle of Katza Plains. Since we are not in open hostilities, the local bishop has been petitioning regularly for assistance with the temple's work here. The faith of the Six grows in the Sorcerer's Kingdom, and there are not enough staff to keep up with everything despite their best efforts. Surely they are not considering sending temple staff here, the man scoffed. For nearly 2 months, she replied, the bishop was met with flat refusal. Then, he resorted to temple law. The temples of the 6 great gods, even the cardinals themselves, cannot refuse him in this. Not outright, at least. Word of his plight has spread across the theocracy. Itzal furrowed his brow. He was a simple man who only knew rough ways, so he had no idea of any of this. What law is this? The man asked grimly. You cannot mean, no. Yes, the woman let out a resigned laugh. In their hesitation to provide support to the Bishop of Irantal, the worst possible option has been forced upon them. The man groaned, bringing a hand up to his forehead. This is crazy. Does the bishop wish for war? Surely they counseled him against such a rash request. I asked just the same when I received the information. My contact said that he remained adamant. That being said, the case the bishop presented must have been extraordinarily compelling. There would not be such a problem otherwise. The man turned back to the table and leaned forward, holding his face in his hands and taking a deep breath. I'm sorry, Itzal spoke into the silence between them, but I don't understand. What happened, exactly? There is a certain ordinance. The woman turned to address him with her rueful smile. A codified section of temple law that has stood for centuries. Every institution of the faith, every shrine, monastery, temple, cathedral, hospital, school and university, is due a portion of the faith militant according to the population that they serve. Its purpose is to assist in maintaining order, and to defend against those who would dare to strike directly against our priesthood and their faithful. But our temples are not under threat of violence here, Itzal replied in confusion. Not now, nor when they were a part of Ria's ties. Why did the bishop call for this kind of help when he has never needed it? With greater congregations, there is the need to maintain order still, but, going by the nature of the bishop's requests since he started sending them, he intends to use the faith militant as a stand-in for the priesthood in local ministry. Itzal's confusion only grew. What did armed men have to do with the work of the priesthood? Itzal, my old friend, the man leaned back on his chair, smiling slightly over his confusion. These are not the faith militant that you're thinking of, not the strong men who volunteer to keep brats and ruffians from misbehaving during temple service in these backwards lands. She speaks of the faith militant of the theocracy, raised since childhood according to the tenets of our religion, both proven in battle and well-versed in the ministry. She speaks of the paladin orders. What? Itzal shot to his feet with a confounded noise. His chair tipped over and fell to the ground with a clatter. Itzal ducked his head at the noise and looked around, but it appeared that the spell cast over them worked even for his abrupt outburst. He righted the piece of fallen furniture and sat back down before continuing heatedly. He's right, this is crazy. How? No. They cannot come here, it will be a disaster. Instead of serving the faithful, they will get them all killed. You must tell them this, you must. The man shot him a look, and Itzal stilled his tongue. He had overstepped his bounds. The woman showed no sign of anger at his behavior, instead speaking in a mollifying tone. Seeing that a decision of this magnitude must pass through the High Council, the woman said, "You may rest assured that what is allowed has been the result of purposeful calculation. They are not heedless and ignorant aristocrats that would make such careless decisions. The various paladin orders around the theocracy have been carefully preparing since the temple acquiesced. It is their hope that if they send the more seasoned and well-traveled of their number, the reaction will not be as extreme as it would normally be. Bear in mind that I have passed this information on to emphasize how crucial our work here has become. The more we know, the less likely anyone is to trip over anything that could trigger a mishap." "How many, then?" Itzal wasn't sure that he wanted to know the answer. "The ordinance states one of the faith militant for every 1,000 faithful." He sifted through his mind for a rough number, but he wasn't sure if it was correct. One thing for certain was that the faith of the Six was reclaiming the population at a gradual, yet seemingly inevitable, pace, and the figure he finally came up with was too many mishaps waiting to happen every day. He grasped at a straw in this seemingly suicidal decision. "You said they did not agree outright." "That is correct," she nodded. "In the end, they agreed that half would be sent at first, then the remainder if no problems arise." "Half, but that's still 36 paladins," she answered for him, "elite members of the orders who qualify for temple duties. The arrangements are still underway, but make no mistake, they will appear sooner or later. We must do what we can to pave the way for their arrival." Zusharu poked his head out of the tunnel to his home, whiskers twitching as he tested the night air. He stood there for many minutes, as the air was strange and alien, as disconcerting as the countless points of light in the endless ceiling overhead. Eventually, he gathered his courage and stepped out, closing the stone portal behind him. Upon the door was scratched the symbol of the Zu-Eigen clan. Behind it was an expanding network of tunnels and warrens that stretched deep below Erantal. Erantal. The name of this human city felt as foreign to him as the city itself. At least dwarves had the good sense to build their cities underground. These humans left their dwellings exposed on the inhospitable surface, with its chaotic weather and incessant brightness that left the Quagoa blind and helpless. Even their night was no true respite, as it was often filled with the glare of an eerie orb of silvery fire. When their clan had migrated here, well, it was more that they were dumped here. They were told by the Crimson Harbinger of Death that it was where they were to make their new home. Left exposed to the sky, their children wailed as their furless forms and sensitive eyes burned in the light of what the locals of the city called the moon. The only thing their parents could do was cover their families with their bodies in scant rags as they themselves trembled in fear and uncertainty, surrounded by the cold, dry and hostile landscape. Zusharu, and the adults of the clan who did not have families to tend to, threw themselves into excavating a new home for their people, making their way down into the soft, black soil. As the hours passed, the skies grew brighter and, to the horror of all, the world became a blinding whiteness. They screamed and cried and whimpered in terror, curling up over their children and doing what they could to shield themselves from the dreadful, searing light. He was lucky enough to be a ways into the new tunnel, but he still had to squeeze his eyes shut against the light that seeped down from the entrance as he kept digging. He made his way deeper and deeper, claws tiredly pulling apart the strange soil and tossing it aside. He made enough room for another and left the hole, blindly feeling around, calling for anyone who could help. And so another joined him, and they made room for more. Over the hours the tunnel grew, longer and deeper. Those who passed out from exhaustion were dragged back outside and replaced with fresh workers, while the children were afforded room in the expanding underground space first. Eventually, the Quagoa reached a wall of stone and broke through. They exclaimed between themselves excitedly when they found that a vast network of crude tunnels lay beyond. It was not as warm and wet and full of life as the cavern networks of their former realm, but it was still a comfort compared to the dreadful surface. Amidst the fungi and moss and abundance of crawling things, they decided to move those on the surface to this new shelter, but then something appeared. A huge slime rose before them and spoke in a female's voice. It told them that they could not be here, that they could only make their home below the demi-human quarter, and that they must turn around and fix the hole. Staring after the strange being and the parade of slimes that followed in her wake, he wondered if they had broken into slime territory. Did slimes even have territory? Did they just encounter some sort of slime lord? A slime queen? Slimes didn't even have males and females, as far as Zusharu knew. Still, they decided that not to invade the territory of the slime queen would be for the best. for they sensed she was even stronger than Pereiro, the greatest of Quagoa lords. The Quagoa of the Azalizia range as a whole had just suffered from a nightmarish calamity, losing 7/8 ths of their entire population. The Zuagan clan was just as devastated as the others, so time was needed to recover before any thought of testing their new neighbors someday. They covered the hole and returned to their work. Another day passed until they could stuff everyone into the freshly excavated tunnels, and another week went by before a makeshift warren formed. The efforts underground continued, but shelter was not their only problem. Fortunately, some things came to them. For the first day, Zushiru wondered if the worms and grubs they found in the soil would be their only sustenance, and the elders considered ordering raids into the slime territory for mushrooms, insects and rats. The night after, however, an elf named Mer and a human named Florine appeared with food, great quantities of meat kept fresh in wondrous magical containers. While it was distributed and they filled their empty bellies, Florine explained how things worked in the human city to the clan leaders. The most important detail at the time was that they would need to earn wages that were exchanged for food and other goods. The idea was strange to the Quagoa, who only knew the toil of expanding their empire under the mountains, offering tribute to their leaders and the frost dragons who ruled over them. It was entirely backwards here. They would receive tribute for their toil. Instead of simply taking what they needed wherever they happened to be, they would need to exchange their treasures instead. Zushiru was uncertain how to feel about that. For the time being, they were offered work in the demi-human quarter, laboring over the ongoing construction at night. They did things that were thought suited for them, establishing foundations and, well, establishing foundations was pretty much all that they did. Sometimes dwarves or other races were placed over them, sometimes it was the other way around. There were undead everywhere as well, performing the most menial of tasks. Though this work was currently plentiful, Zushiru thought that it would be limited. Eventually, they would not be needed. Then what would they do? He looked down as he walked out into the night, staring down at a crinkled sheet of paper. Before anything else, he would need to stop by the vampire post to pick up a delivery of ores from their old mountain home. His sister had just given birth to her first litter, but she had lost her mate in the battle against the Crimson Harbinger, so now it was up to Zushiru to help her out. Zushiru sighed. Before, all he would have needed to do was forage around a bit while doing other things. Now, everything was so horribly complicated. Work for food, work for ores, work for everything. They had to order in what did not exist here. The earth below the city was dark clay that was absent of mineral ores, so the bounty that their people usually existed on was no longer theirs to enjoy. It was not a place where Quagoa would normally live. Zushiru. A voice called down to him from above, "You're joining us tonight?" Zushiru looked up. On the terrace above was a small gathering of his clansmen, who had assembled to do something about the impending lack of work. They had started a project of sorts, based on what they had seen around the quarter. After this, he waved the paper over his head and went on his way. Up and out of the bowl of the demi-human quarter Zushiru walked, out to the gatehouse near where the steps leading up to the top of the city's inner wall were laid. He walked past the undead sentries, towards the dragon pens. A pale figure with glowing crimson eyes stood behind a desk in front of the hoardings on the wall. "Welcome, dear customer," she said. "How may the vampire post be of service today?" This female always seemed to be here, and she was always so polite. Zushiru never knew what to say in reply. He simply dipped his head once and placed the sheet of paper on the counter. She took the sheet in her hand and checked through a book laid open on the desk. After a moment, she lightly tapped a bell. Another pale, smooth-faced female appeared, taking the paper and walking away into the building. She reappeared with a box between her hands a short while later, placing it on the counter before him. Zushiru lifted the cover, sniffing the content. Though riddled with impurities, the ore within was edible. He took the box into his hands and nodded before he walked off. The two pale females bowed. "Thank you for your patronage," their voices followed him as he turned to go back the way he came. As Zushiru made his way back to the clan warren, he looked down at the box with a worried sigh. It wasn't much, barely enough to keep the litter fed until the next delivery came in. Unlike many things that the various peoples in the city consumed, meat and ore were expensive, and his clan toiled endlessly just to get by. The human named Florine explained this, too, at length. Something about supply and demand and how prices for meat would fall eventually, and the shortage of ore in the city would only last until trade caught up. There was a lot more, but her stream of strange words mostly bounced off of Zushiru's furry head and fell to the ground powerlessly. His parents cared much for him, finding the best ores that they could feed him when he was a child, so his coat was strong and hard to penetrate. What little he understood of what she said was that things would become cheaper someday. Unfortunately, they would also finish the tasks in this demi-human quarter that fed them someday as well. He made his way back down into the warren and left the ores with his sister, then returned to the surface with all of his worries continuing to plague him. The clansmen that had called out to him were still in the same place as before. With them were members of several other races, 2 ogres, some goblins, a troll and a handful of lizardmen. They were prospective students who would pay them for instruction in hand-to-hand combat. In the past weeks, Zushiru and his clansmen discovered that the demi-humans in the city were not so great at it. The bare handful of remaining experts in the clan saw this as an opportunity to collect tributes, and these demi-humans were more than happy to pay them to learn. The payments were usually in the form of handicrafts, furs or meat. What they collected was not enough to feed the clan on its own, but at least it was something. Zushiru shuffled up to the rows of students and instructors sparring with one another, and he frowned over the sight. Because demi-humans were of various sizes and had their own racial attributes, he wasn't sure how well Quagoa combat would work for them. Smaller demi-humans like goblins were roughly Quagoa-sized, but they lacked strong fur and claws, though lizardmen had a measure of toughness due to their scales. Their long bodies and thick tails were something Quagoa did not have. Ogres and trolls were huge and strong. At least they could partner off one another. Maybe they were just happy picking up pointers and techniques that would work for them. Zushiru wasn't sure if it would ever earn the clan enough to survive. They would need far more students to do so. "Oh, Shiru, you're back." An elderly Quagoa with red fur shuffled up to him. He was the strongest of the Zu-Igan clan that remained, having been considered too old to fight on the Day of Sorrow, and the one who had come up with this idea. Zuloru, Zushiru clasped his hands before him, lowering his head respectfully. "How is your family?" My sister is cranky," Zushiru replied. "She wants the little ones to have more ore, but she knows this is all we can afford. I think I end up taking the brunt of her bad mood." "Understandable," Zuloru nodded. "It was so easy in our old home, even if it wasn't always the best stuff, we never lacked for ore and food." They shared a long moment of silent melancholy. Little else could be done about it. "Perhaps the tunnelers will find something below." "There is nothing below," Zuloru shook his head. "They hit bedrock the other day, and it's just old limestone that smells of nothing else. No food or water, no caves or ore, and we are not allowed to explore beyond the confines of this quarter." "Faye, why did they choose for a clan to come to this place?" "It should be obvious, shouldn't it?" Zuloru's voice turned bitter. "Because we are of Zu. You don't see any sign of the Pooh and Po here. Even in these dire times, they used the great tragedy as an opportunity, whispering in the ears of those in power to send us away. They do not care that we have been forced to live in this desolate place of black clay and veinless stone." Zuloru stomped the ground in anger, and Zushiru scratched his chest. "How indeed? The Crimson Harbinger told them to live here, and the human told them how things worked. By all appearances, they were provided with the bare minimum of what they needed and were left to figure the rest out on their own." He decided to move to a less depressing topic. "How many new students since yesterday?" "A few," Zuloru replied. "I believe that, once this demi-human quarter begins to fill, we can expect a substantial number. The Mountain Mole sect must be vigilant of the others in the place, however. We must keep prospective disciples from straying into their grasp." Zushiru nodded in agreement. If they were to afford more and better ores for their offspring, they needed to keep the 2 other sects in the quarter from gaining in reputation and membership. The foremost of the rivals was the Azure Sky, Iron Fist sect, which occupied an expansive complex near the western gatehouse. They appeared to collect the young, training them from an impressionable age. After some digging around, it was found that their buildings were shallow, so what one noted from the surface was all that there was. Though the sect's disciples were young, the master there was quite intimidating. The one time he went to challenge them, a tall human female in flowing robes had brandished a long stick of wood at him. The end was wide and covered in bristles. He had never seen such a weapon before. Quagga were only strong against metal, so Zushiru had prudently withdrawn to rethink his approach. The second rival was more manageable. The Justice Dragon sect had a single hall in a space between the southern entrance and the eastern wall and had no disciples to speak of. Their master was nothing more than an aged human male of few words. All Zushiru had to do there was draw away people that looked interested in learning the ways of close combat. The old man ultimately did nothing. He just sat within his hall as if new students would simply drop in with no effort on his part. "Zulauru," he asked, "the noise from the Justice Dragon sect the other day, has there been any hint as to what it was?" "Rumor has been going around that there's a new student there. The old man is no longer alone in his hall." "What? I thought I kept them all away." He stormed off towards the Justice Dragon sect. Perhaps this new student had come in during the day, but it wouldn't do. They couldn't let a rival sect gain even a bit of a claw hold. With few dwellings yet built in the demi-human quarter, Zushiru could see across the darkness of the night to the rival school. He scurried over in a matter of minutes and studied the face of the building. Running his gaze over its wooden supports and planks, he could hear the voice of a male and a female filtering through the thin panels of the entrance. It appeared that the rumors were true. Zushiru pondered how he might wrest away this new student. Well, it shouldn't be hard. The master here was just an old human who was often away. Zushiru hopped about as he warmed himself up. After feeling suitably ready, he shouted at the building. "Old human." No response. The voices on the other side paused for a moment before resuming. "Old human." Zushiru raised his voice. The voices inside paused again, only to resume once more. Really, had they no shame? A challenger had come, and they did nothing but cower inside their hall. A small group, consisting of various quarter residents, started to gather around on the street nearby. Zushiru grinned, wheezing laughter blowing out of his nose. Good. Their cowardice would be seen by all, and the Justice Dragon sect would lose all face. What dragon, even? It was just an old man and his timid student. Zushiru took a deep breath. "Old Huma." He fell silent at the sound of someone working the door of the building. After several moments, the entrance slid open. Zushiru fluffed out his fur and assumed an intimidating stance. "You've finally shown yourself, old one." The head of a dragon appeared in the doorway, and Zushiru froze. "Eh? This is not an old human." Before any further thoughts could form, the dragon's head lunged forward and snatched him off of the street. He didn't even have time to scream. The curious residents that had gathered around scattered away in fright. Zushiru disappeared into the bowels of the Justice Dragon sect, and the door silently slid shut with his passing. The world shifted back into cohesiveness. Ilishnish's body tingled almost painfully as her blind sight remapped the abrupt change in her surroundings. She felt the ground below her, so she tucked in the wings that she had started to unfurl in panic. She was indoors. It was a large chamber, roughly as large as the spacious tavern of the Frosty Beard. It lacked furnishings, however, and had no balconies or sunken alcoves. The scent of fresh cedar filled her nostrils. Beyond the thinly paneled walls and rounded pillars lining the space, it was bare of any decoration or value. At first, she thought it a newly built warehouse, or perhaps some sort of prison, but it lacked the sense of being built for storage, and its framework of cedar had no hope of holding her should she choose to escape. On one end of the chamber, a figure stirred from where it was seated. "Lady Shiltia," it asked, "do you require any assistance?" A deep and venerable-sounding voice. A strong and pleasant voice. To her disappointment, however, she only found an aged human male approaching them. His measured footfalls echoed lightly around her, and he stopped several meters away. "As a matter of fact," Lady Shiltir answered lightly, "there is something you may be able to help me with." Ilishnish looked down to the source of the second voice, then realized her claws were still stuck in Lady Shiltir's torso. She tried flicking her away, but the tiny vampire wouldn't budge at all. Ilishnish dug in and pulled mightily, to no avail. "You, stop that." Lady Shiltir's voice rolled out and snapped through the air at her. Ilishnish flinched and froze. Why did she stop, damn it? She hated herself at that moment, hated her frost dragon nature that compelled her to obey, having experienced firsthand how impossibly strong Lady Shiltier was. "You're being rude," Lady Shiltier scolded her. "Just look at what you're doing to the floor. Really, there isn't an ounce of propriety or awareness in you." Elishnish focused her attention downwards. Beneath her, there were gashes in the polished floorboards, whole planks splintered and torn away to reveal the soil beneath. The ground appeared to be quite soft, maybe she could quickly burrow away when the chance presented itself. Lady Shiltier stepped back, and Elishnish's claws slipped out of her without any sense of resistance. The exquisite fabrics of her priceless gown showed no change from their pristine state. Elishnish peered down at the diminutive figure, examining her magical garb for perhaps the 20th time. "This new school of yours," Lady Shiltier said, "this justice." Her voice trailed off, features forming into a complicated expression. "Justice Dragon Dojo," the aged human's voice filled in for her. "Yes, that." Lady Shiltier frowned. "Are you really set on that name?" "It's a bit. I believe it to be a deep and meaningful name," the old man said. "It has a certain ring to it as well, don't you think?" The complicated expression did not leave Lady Shiltier's face. "I understand why you chose that name," she said, "but something still seems, well, whatever, it's your show." Lady Shiltier's hand disappeared into the air, reappearing again with a plain-looking sheet of paper. She cleared her throat before reading it. "Cultivating discipline in spirit, mind and body. That's what your pamphlet says, yes?" Lady Shiltier dangled the paper before her as she spoke. "This one is lacking in discipline, and you appear to be lacking in students." "Wait, what?" Elishnish protested. "Why am I? Who gave you permission to speak?" Lady Shiltier scowled at her. "Do that again and I'll be nailing your tongue to the city wall." Elishnish's jaws snapped shut, and her tongue clove to the roof of her mouth. Why was she stuck under this insanely unreasonable undead monster? "Anyways," Lady Shiltier continued, "she still has a schedule to keep, but, on her days off, she'll be under your tutelage. Don't let her escape." "Escape, you say?" The old man looked up to Elishnish, stroking his beard. "This is honestly quite unexpected. Is there some problem?" "I am on standby to assist with various tasks around the city," he replied, "so I will be here unless I am called away, sir." "Excellent," Lady Shiltier smiled. "I look forward to the results of her training." Lady Shiltier vanished from the hall, disappearing in the same fashion by which they had arrived. Elishnish shared a long look with the old man, then she turned her head around, examining what appeared to be the entrance of the building just beyond a pair of thick wooden pillars. "Lady Shiltier's instructions are that you train under me," the man said. "I do hope you are not planning on leaving." "I have no reason to be here," Elishnish replied. "Neither did I demand any training." "Have you not considered the consequences of displeasing Lady Shiltier?" "You're not Lady Shiltier," Elishnish informed him. "If she doesn't like me doing one thing, then I'll just do something else." Once Elishnish finally thought she figured out how the door worked, she rose onto all fours to leave. "I believe her instructions were to not allow you to escape." Elishnish felt a presence before her and found the aged human standing in front of the door. She twisted her head around to look at the head of the hall, then back to the door again. "When did he move there?" "Your cooperation would be appreciated," he said. "This building is relatively fragile." The old man stood with a rigid, unassuming posture. Beyond the fact that he seemingly teleported all the way from the head of the hall to its entrance, Elishnish could not sense how strong he was. He didn't have the bearing of a magic caster, and she had never witnessed anything move that quickly before. Why was this city full of such ridiculous beings? Elishnish turned around and lay back down with a long-suffering sigh. The polished floorboards frosted over, and she started doodling upon them with a claw. The human reseated himself at the head of the hall. "Now, why is it that Lady Shiltier would send you to me for instruction?" "Who knows? I'm sure you must have some idea. Why were so many people in this place so insistent on knowing things about her? Why did they even feel entitled to the response that they sought?" "I don't," she told him. "I came back from work today and she appeared at my door, accusing me of some wrongdoing." The human studied her at length, and Elishnish shifted uncomfortably. What? Perhaps she was dissatisfied with your performance in some way?" I don't think so, Ilishnish said. If anything, my performance met with an overwhelmingly positive reception. The substantial earnings that resulted are irrefutable proof of this. Then what is this about having issues with discipline? I said I don't know. I didn't ask for any of this. Her tail lashed out over the floor, bumping into one of the pillars along the side of the hall. The entire structure shuddered ominously. The old man looked up at the rafters, then down at the hole in the floor. How about we start by reining in your emotions? The old man suggested. This is something that could use some work, as the condition of the hall might attest to. What insanity are you spouting? Ilishnish looked down at him incredulously. Emotions should flow forth, lest one stifles their own craft. Perhaps I have gotten the wrong idea. Are you something like a barbarian? I believe I ran into one of those sorts last year, a brawler type who combined monk skills and totemic powers. Quite noisy, he was. A barbarian. Indeed, the old man replied. He was the disreputable sort, so it came to blows. Fortunately, some help at a crucial moment allowed me to manage a close victory. A close victory? Did humans commonly have such powerful individuals rise from their number? Maybe exploration wasn't as safe of an idea as she originally thought. At least her home in the Azalizia range only had frost giants at worst, and no one usually came to bother them there. Still, he muttered thoughtfully, there is always room to better oneself. Even if you are a barbarian. I'm a bard. Her shout reverberated around the hall. The old man frowned a long frown, falling into a long silence. Why do none of you people ever believe me when I say that? Ilishnish complained. If you mean Lady Shultir and her servants, the old man said, looking back up at her, it is probably because they have only considered dragons as dragons. Of course she was a dragon. What was that supposed to mean? Ilishnish couldn't make any sense out of his explanation. If this is the case, he continued, you may have been left in my care with similar thinking in mind. While I am not exactly a dragon, perhaps she thought that I would have an easier time instructing you. A sort of feverish gleam came from his steely grey eyes, at great odds with his otherwise stony face. Thoughts of Hegemon came to mind. He wasn't going to turn her into a pet, was he? To be trained like some sort of animal to do tricks for his petty entertainment. I don't need to learn anything from here, she told him. Dragons seem to be associated with power and wisdom by the people here, but that does not sound like what a wise being would say. Are you absolutely certain that there is nothing for you here? Ilishnish glowered down at him, then quickly assumed a more neutral expression, just in case the old human wasn't as benign as he appeared. He was almost certainly possessed of extraordinary power, yet the way he spoke was annoyingly humble. At least Lady Shultir played a part deserving of her strength, leaving no question as to the difference between herself and those around her. Maybe this individual had some weakness in his character that she could exploit. It would certainly explain why he had inexplicably settled on squatting in this unassuming wooden building. If she could learn how so many beings in this city became so absurdly powerful, lingering for a while would be well worth it. What do you plan on teaching me? Ilishnish asked. Lady Shultir mentioned something about a lack of discipline, propriety and self-awareness. The man pointedly looked at the hole in the floor again. You have some strength, yet it seems that you have not mastered it. Perhaps by cultivating discipline in body, you may in turn find balance in mind and spirit. That makes absolutely no sense. Is that so? Perhaps it would be easier to just start rather than sit around talking about it. The man rose to his feet. The Justice Dragon Dojo was originally intended to train monks. However, since you are a dragon that fights with their body, there may still be much for you to gain. But first, discipline. The human walked around her, eyeing her in a way that she did not much care for. What could she even learn from this monk training? Dragons already knew how to fight with their bodies. Ah yes, the man said when he returned to stand in front of her, you may address me as Master Tian. Tian. Master Tian. He corrected her, I don't believe Lady Shultir mentioned your name. Shiva. Shiva? Master Tian raised an eyebrow. If I'm not mistaken, dragons should have more substantial names. Well, no matter. Can we get this training over with? She asked. I have to return to the Dwarf Kingdom at dawn. Annoyance filled Ilishnish upon being forced to admit her powerlessness over her situation. What would this discipline even achieve to improve her lot? She doubted it would make her strong enough to resist Lady Sholtier. At dawn, Master Tien said, "Perhaps we should just conduct a basic assessment today. How do bards engage in combat around here, by the way? The fighting kind appears to be quite scarce." How could this so-called master not know how others fought? Doubts started to rise in her mind. As far as I have read, Ilishnish sniffed, how humanoid bards end up can vary between fragile beings that lend their support from a distance to frontline combatants. The only bard I've personally witnessed fighting was Frost Giant Scold, who wielded a great axe in direct battle. Oh, then how do dragon bards fight? With my natural weapons? I can't exactly wield the weapons that humans can, if you haven't noticed. Ilishnish raised a foreleg and worked her talons in midair. Being able to manipulate the handle of a weapon with any semblance of finesse was a dubious prospect, at best. I believe we dragons are at an advantage, however, Ilishnish told Master Tien. The bards that I've seen locally appear to equip themselves lightly, with perhaps chain shirts, rapiers and bows at best. I have the benefit of my natural armor and weapons, which do not burden me with additional encumbrance and will grow in strength as I do. In just half a millennia, I doubt that any mortal artifice would be able to overcome my natural armament. After her explanation, Master Tien stroked his grey beard thoughtfully. With how often he did so, Ilishnish started to become curious about what it felt like. After some time, he stopped and nodded to himself. "I believe I have a rough idea about your direction now," he told her. "With what you describe, you would be suited for some sort of dancer class." "We dragons have ways of our own," Ilishnish replied. "Pursuing mortal paths would rob us of our natural strengths." "I see. I was uncertain whether they existed here or not, but, in hindsight, I suppose that they must. The path you pursue is one unique to your kind, a racial prestige class, or a series of them." That had a nice ring to it. Ilishnish leaned forward to peer at Master Tien closely. "You're not going to try to have me become a monk like the ones you originally intended on training here?" "In your case," he replied, "I believe that it would be a waste. The greatest beings that I know of often combined the strengths of their respective races with classes that were only available to them. It should be an example in this sorcerous kingdom, where many peoples of many backgrounds and species can pursue their own unique paths for the greater good." She hadn't a clue about his greater good, but the rest of what he said made sense to her. Maybe there was some wisdom to be gained here, after all. "Then what are we waiting for?" Ilishnish rose to her feet. "Let us begin, Master Tien."